Physiocracy is an economic theory developed by a group of 18th-century Enlightenment French economists who believed that the wealth of nations was derived solely from the value of land agriculture, or land development, and that agricultural products should be highly priced. Their theories originated in France and were most popular during the second half of the 18th century. Physiocracy is perhaps the first well-developed theory of economics. The movement was particularly dominated by François Quesnay and Anne-Robert Jacques Turgot. The most significant contribution of the physiocrats was their emphasis on productive work as the source of national wealth. This is in contrast to earlier schools, in particular mercantilism, which often focused on the ruler's wealth, accumulation of gold, or the balance of trade. Whereas, the mercantilist school of economics said that value in the products of society was created at the point of sale, by the seller exchanging his products for more money than the products had previously been worth. The physiocratic school of economics was the first to see labor as the sole source of value. However, for the physiocrats, only agricultural labor created this value in the products of society. All industrial and non-agricultural labor was unproductive appendages to agricultural labor. At the time the physiocrats were formulating their ideas, economies were almost entirely agrarian. That is presumably why the theory considered only agricultural labor to be valuable. Physiocrats viewed the production of goods and services as consumption of the agricultural surplus. Since the main source of power was from human or animal muscle and all energy was derived from the surplus from agricultural production, profit in capitalist production was really only the rent obtained by the owner of the land on which the agricultural production is taking place. Historian David B. Danbaum explains, the physiocrats damned cities for their artificiality and praised more natural styles of living. They celebrated farmers, they called themselves les economistes, but are generally referred to as physiocrats to distinguish them from the many schools of economic thought that followed them. Precursors. Physiocracy is an agrarianist philosophy. In the late Roman Republic, the dominant senatorial class was not allowed to engage in banking or commerce but relied on their latifunda, large plantations, for income. They circumvented this rule through freedmen proxies who sold surplus agricultural goods. Another inspiration came from China's economic system, then the largest in the world. Chinese society broadly distinguished four occupations, with scholar bureaucrats at the top and merchants at the bottom. Leading physiocrats like François Quesnay were avid Confucianists who advocated China's agrarian policies. Some scholars have advocated connections with the school of agriculturalism, which promoted utopian communalism. The concept natural order of physiocracy originated from way of nature of Chinese Confucianism. History. Pierre Le Peasant, Sieur de Bois-Guilbert served as a member of Louis XIV's local administration of Paris, and wrote pamphlets and booklets on subjects related to his work. Taxation, grain trade, and money. Le Peasant asserted that wealth came from self-interest and markets are connected by money flows. Thus he realized that lowering prices in times of shortage, common at the time, is dangerous economically as it acted as a disincentive to production. Generally, Le Peasant advocated less government interference in the grain market, as any such interference would generate anticipations which would prevent the policy from working. For instance, if the government bought corn abroad, some people would speculate that there is likely to be a shortage and would buy more corn, leading to higher prices and more of a shortage. This was an early example of advocacy of free trade. In anonymously published tracts, Vauban proposed a system known as la dime royale. This involved major simplification of the French tax code by switching to a relatively flat tax on property and trade. Vauban's use of statistics contrasted with earlier empirical methods in economics. Around the time of the 7 Years' War between France and England, the Physiocracy movement grew. Several journals appeared, signaling an increasing audience in France for new economic ideas. Among the most important were the journal Economique, which promoted agronomy and rational husbandry, and the journal du Commerce, which was heavily influenced by the Irishman Richard Cantillon, both dominated by physiocrats. The journal de l'Agriculture, du Commerce et des Finances, and the Éphémérides du Citoyen. Also, Vincent de Gournay, the intendant du Commerce, brought together a group of young researchers including François Véron du Verger de Forbonnais and one of the two most famous physiocrats, and Robert Jacques Turgot. The other, François Quesnay, was among those writing prolifically in contemporaneous journals. In the 19th century, Henry George in the United States advocated the collection of land rent as the primary if not the sole source of public revenue. Tableau Economique. The tableau économique or economic table is an economic model first described by François Quesnay in 1759, which laid the foundation of the physiocrats' economic theories. It also contains the origins of modern ideas on the circulation of wealth and the nature of interrelationships in the economy. The model Quesnay created consisted of three economic agents. The proprietary class consisted only of landowners, the productive class consisted of agricultural laborers, the sterile class was made up of artisans and merchants. The flow of production and/or cash between the three classes originated with the proprietary class because they owned the land and bought from both of the other classes. Characteristics. Natural order. The physiocrats thought there was a natural order that allowed human beings to live together. Men did not come together via a somewhat arbitrary social contract. Rather, we have to discover the laws of the natural order that will allow individuals to live in society without losing significant freedoms. The concept of natural order originated in China. Chinese had believed that there can be good government only when a perfect harmony exists between the way of man and the way of nature. Individualism and laissez-faire. The physiocrats, especially Turgot, believed that self-interest is the motivation for each segment of the economy to play its role. Each individual is best suited to determine what goods he wants and what work would provide him with what he wants out of life. While a person might labor for the benefit of others, he will work harder for his own benefit. However, each person's needs are being supplied by many other people. The system works best when there is a complementary relationship between one person's needs and another person's desires, and trade restrictions place an unnatural barrier to achieving one's goals. Laissez-faire was popularized by physiocrats Vincent de Gournay, who is said to have adopted the term from François Quesnay's writings on China. Private property. None of the theories concerning the value of land could work without strong legal support for the ownership of private property. Combined with a strong sense of individualism, private property becomes a critical component of the tableau's functioning. Diminishing returns. Turgot was one of the first to recognize that successive applications of the variable input will cause the product to grow, first at an increasing rate, later at a diminishing rate until it reaches a maximum. This was a recognition that the productivity gains required to increase national wealth had an ultimate limit, and, therefore, wealth was not infinite. Investment capital. Both Quesnay and Robert Jacques Turgot, Baron de Lorne, recognized that capital was needed by farmers to start the production process, and both were proponents of using some of each year's profits to increase productivity. Capital was also needed to sustain the laborers while they produced their product. Turgot recognizes that there is opportunity cost and risk involved in using capital for something other than land ownership, and he promotes interest as serving a strategic function in the economy. Subsequent developments. The ideas of the physiocrats had an influence on David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and above all, Henry George, who appears at first to have come to similar conclusions independently. George was the driving force behind what became known as the single tax movement, not to be confused with flat tax. The single tax is a proposal for the use of the annual rental value of land as the principal or sole source of public revenue.